Good morning and welcome to this class. I want to bless the name of God and Jesus Christ who has kept us well for his enduring mercies and ending love. He loves all of you. May you be blessed. In this lesson, we want to look at the factors, or we want to look at population distribution. And just like we did discuss in the interactive session, we said when we talk about population distribution, we are looking at the spatial spread out of people across the globe, i.e., how are the human population, the human settlements spread out across the earth. That is what we term as population distribution. In other words, this distribution can either be even or uneven, and in terms of explaining further this distribution, then we have the concept of population density. Under population density, we are looking at the number of people living in an area per square kilometer. Out of that kind of concept, then we are able to tell whether the population of an area is dense or sparse or scarce. So, population distribution, we are looking at those concepts. And out of the distribution of population, we also birth other ideas of underpopulation, overpopulation, and optimum population. But before we discuss those other concepts, we need to understand the factors that influence the distribution of people across the globe. What are those factors which influence population distribution? These factors can be grouped into, one of them is environmental factors. And the environmental factor, of course, we are looking at the physical factors. For example, here we are looking at the natural resources available in an area. Natural resources are usually an attraction to an area. Remember last time when we were looking at population movements, we said they are pull and push factors. So natural resources is a pull factor which attracts people to an area, which attracts settlements to an area. That is what we call natural resources. And there is a tendency of areas that have got abundance of natural resources to attract more and more settlements or more people in an area. You look at our case here in Uganda, we have a higher population concentrations in the areas of these mountain slopes because of the resources which are available there. You remember there was a time when Kilembe town was a hub of activity and a lot of people were living in that place. You know how many people are living in the small town of Kakira because of the natural resources. But when you look at the world over, you see those areas which are endowed with natural resources. Look at the Ruhr region of Germany. Look at the Great Lakes region of the USA, where we talk about that industrial belt. Look at the east coast of Japan. All these areas are seriously endowed and therefore they become concentration. Look at the Nile Valley of Egypt. Then we also talk about the climate. Climate is a very important factor of population distribution because once again, like when it comes to natural resources, climate is also a pull factor. More so when it comes to, and you know, when you're talking about climate here, you're talking about the elements of temperature and rainfall. Rainfall is very important because it's one of the most important sources of water. When there is no water in an area, then you will not expect people to live in an area. Temperatures, on the other hand, human populations can only withstand a certain temperature. If it exceeds that, then life becomes unbearable. So areas which are conducive for settlements, the humid tropics with mild temperatures, a balance between temperature and rainfall, these are areas of higher population concentrations. When you talk about the equatorial belt of the world, areas, Indonesia, Malaysia, India, Bangladesh, through Africa, and all the way to Latin America. These are areas which favor. But even when you go to the temperate world in the northern hemisphere, the southern countries or south-facing slopes have higher population concentrations because of the warm weather that is experienced in those areas. Then we have other factors under environmental. We have soils, which are also very important as far as population concentrations are concerned, and this probably explains why in the ancient times Population tended to concentrate along river valleys, those ancient river valley towns which we talk about. We talk about these likes of Alexandria in Egypt and other parts of the world, because these were areas of fertile soils, and these were communities which were still solely based before the Industrial Revolution. They were solely based on agriculture. So soils are very important. And if you tell someone from Bududa that migrate and go and live in Kiliandongo, they will cry and cry and cry and eventually refuse, because the soils of Kiliandongo are not the same as the soils of Bududa. When we talk about drainage here we are talking about the availability of water. Water is very important. No man wants to live in an area, even in the desert areas. People live in areas of water, or what we call, we refer to as the oasis. That's where life can be supported, and that's where they live. They don't just live anywhere they come across. So water is very important. The Great Lakes region of East Africa is densely populated than other parts. The Great Lakes region of the USA is densely populated than other parts because of the availability of water. Then we have the economic factors, and under economic factors we are talking about, of course, under the physical ones, I also need to mention that there is relief, because relief here talking about topography, and topography influences whether it will be easier to construct in an area or very difficult to construct in an area. Certain areas, because of the nature of the terrain, people cannot live there. You got these Swiss Alps of Europe, people cannot live there. Put aside the cold temperatures, but even just the nature of the terrain cannot favor population concentrations over there. If you go to these mountainous areas of East Africa, people tend to settle on the lower slopes and where construction is possible. But where construction is impossible, they will find no people. Then we have the economic factors. Another economic factor we are looking at, economic development, for example, is very important, because centers of economic growth are usually centers of higher population concentration. They attract people. The reason as to why people die to get visas here to go and live in Europe, Western Europe, Americas, China, Japan, it's because those are centers of economic growth. A lot of Ugandans are moving to Dubai because Dubai is now a center of economic growth. And economic growth presents opportunities. These opportunities, we have employment. Employment is a pull factor. People go where they have jobs. But we also have these better social amenities, which become part of an attraction. People want to go and live in such areas. The beautiful infrastructure, which is found in such areas, also attracts people to live there. Then we also have political factors, and here we're talking about government policy. No government can influence population distribution by just a policy. Can come up with a policy and say, the correct example is here in Bududa, in Bugisu area, where they are planning people to move away from the areas of Bududa, and those slopes are very going to go and live in the plains of Bulambuli. Formerly, they were taking them to Yandong. That is the policy. The government has also just been evicting people from the areas of Bunyoro to pave way for the construction of the oil pipeline. That is government policy. Government can set up irrigation settlement schemes like Mobuku and the others in East Africa and all over the world. They can come up with policies and create settlements. They can come up with policies and create areas of conservation. They are pushing away people to go and live in certain other areas. That is government policy. Government, under political factors, we also have political conflicts. Political conflicts always drive away people from an area because people cannot withstand that death. They will move away. You know very well how people have been moving away from South Sudan into Uganda. You remember during the early 2000s and late 90s when the Kony insurgency was on, people were moving away from the villages to urban areas. These are political conflicts we are talking about. People migrate because of political conflicts. They move away from one area to another area because of political conflicts. And you know, when in population, when someone moves out of an area, is reducing on the number of the area of origin, and then increasing on the number in the area of destination. So that's what we mean by influencing population distribution and population growth as a whole. Then government can also decide to create rural or urban areas. Recently, the government of Uganda created cities. These cities are centers of economic growth. These cities are centers of development, and therefore they tend to attract a lot of people in these areas. because people then would begin to migrate. These are areas of opportunity. People move from their villages to go and sell chapati, to go and sell mandas, to go and sell tomatoes in the urban areas, and eventually we find that the urban areas will be characterized by higher population concentrations compared to other parts of the country. So when you look at those factors, then we go into the concepts of overpopulation and underpopulation. Underpopulation, of course, we defined it as a scenario where the number of people living in an area is sufficient compared to the resources in an area. I'll give you the example of DRC here, where they say it's one of the most highly endowed countries of the world, but most of their resources are idle. That's why the colonialists was able to come in and exploit a lot of them. So where you have more resources than the exploitation capacity, than the consumption capacity. If you find a person owning 2 square miles of land, but he has 1 child, there are 3 people in the home, that is underpopulation. It means the bulk of the land is going to remain redundant, and therefore it means then that is the scenario we are talking about underpopulation. Overpopulation, on the other hand, is the opposite of underpopulation. Here you have many people compared to the resources, and there are implications for all these scenarios, because with overpopulation it means that there are more people than land available, there are more people than the water, there are more people than the social services, there are more people than the natural resources available to support people in those areas. Then optimum population, here we are looking at a scenario where there is a balance in terms of population and the resources available, that the population can put the resources to optimum consumption. No resources are left idle. No resources are left redundant. That is optimum population. But like I said, that these scenarios have got implications. For example, overpopulation has got implications on resources, implications on governments, implications on many things. One of them, of course, you know very well that if the number of people exceeds the carrying capacity of the land, then the result is going to be environmental degradation. Eventually, people begin to encroach on the forests, begin to encroach on the wetlands, people begin to encroach on the rangelands, areas of conservation, and eventually begin to cut them down. So the yield is environmental degradation. The reason as to why the slopes of Mount Elgon are being degraded because of the large numbers of people in these areas. So that the gentle slopes of the lower areas are no longer sufficient. So people continue to encroach on the upper slopes of the mountain, and eventually create what we call slope instability, and then the outcome are natural disasters. So there is a problem there. There is also overutilization of resources when it comes to overpopulation. When the people are too many, you've been hearing our president telling us how when he came to power in 1986 and we were about 12 million people, by then we used to catch bigger fish in the lake. The Nile perch being fished out of that lake would weigh on average 50 kilograms and above. Today, people have been fishing Nile perch of 1 kilogram or 2 kilograms. Because when the population increased, people tended to exploit these resources more and more. You see what is happening on our lake shores and river banks. The river banks have been depleted because of the overcultivation of our soils, and eventually the soils also become degraded. We have issues of pressure on government expenditure. The government now tends to spend a lot on the people than on development. Look at our scenario here, where over 50% of our budget is consumption expenditure, not development expenditure. So it means that we are spending more money on the people than on development. That is a problem of overpopulation. Overpopulation also leads to land conflicts. Conflicts are usually a problem of population. In these countries where there are small populations, look at a country like East Timor with less than 1 million people. Look at a country like Suriname with less than 1 million people. And many other countries of the world which are small, like Brunei. These places live in harmony because the resources are available, the resources are sufficient. Look at Singapore, the resources are available to support the population. But what gives birth to conflict is discontent in terms of sharing of resources. So when people feel aggrieved, then they resort to conflicts, they resort to war. So all those are implications of overpopulation. Underpopulation, on the other hand, has also got implications. The resources lie idle because you cannot exploit them. And eventually people live in poverty because they are not exploiting the resources. You don't have the capacity. You have the land, but you don't have the capacity to exploit your land. So eventually there is poverty existing in this area. The optimum population, on the other hand, also has got its own implication. But optimum population, is the most ideal situation of all the three scenarios, because under optimum population it means that the resources are being exploited optimally, and optimally here not implying maximally but optimally, where you're exploiting just enough for your consumption, for your needs, and then there's no depletion because there is a balance between the resources and the people. So eventually here you'll find that there is a steady economic growth because the resources are being put to use in these areas, infrastructure is being put in place. There are no conflicts in the area because everybody is part of the development agenda, and so on and so forth. So those are issues of economic of population distribution. There is underpopulation, overpopulation, and optimum population. But then also there is the concept of young and old population. When we talk about younger populations, we are referring to countries whose population pyramids are broad-based and narrow at the peak. But then we have countries of aging population, and under the aging population, we're talking about countries whose population pyramids are narrow at the base and broad at the peak, implying that a larger proportion of the number of their people lie in the advanced age groups. So these issues have got implications. Countries with an aging population in the world, we have the likes of Japan and Germany, where the population is estimated to be even dropping because there are more old people in the population than young people. When we are talking about fertility, you should know the reasons for this, because if there is no addition in the lower age groups, then the population will begin to shrink, will begin to dwindle, because there are not being any additions being made in the population. You look at the likes of Japan, people are spending so many years. Some people have even given up on childbearing. They don't see it as a necessity, they don't see it as a requirement. So eventually we have these issues arising. Then, of course, like I said, there are implications. In aging population, there are implications. The same, and these implications sometimes are quite synonymous with those of the young population. For example, the dependence burden cuts across. The elderly become dependent, so is the younger people in the population. They become dependent. The good thing with the younger population, is that there is enough energy, labor supply, and the consumption and the consumptive demand. So you realize that the market is there, the revenue base is there, the labor base, the labor force is there. But with an aging population, there are fewer people who are working because we don't have young people who are joining the labor force. We have people who are exiting the labor force, and when they exit, they are no longer taxpayers. They are no longer effective part of the effective demand. So they don't form part of the tax base. So we have these implications of population growth and the population structure, which must be discussed. We discussed them the other day during the interactive session in quite detail. So I will implore you to look at them, study them more, and then next time, of course, when we meet, we shall begin looking at the demographic transition model, which will explain how government have been transitioning, populations of the world have been transitioning from different stages to different stages, and we shall see where we are as Uganda, as East Africa, as Africa, as compared to other parts of the world. God bless you. Have a lovely day.